Hi, I'm Jake, purchasing agent at Amoco, providing you with everything you need for clay. This episode is brought to you by Amoco Brent. Find your favorite Amoco glazes or Brent equipment at your local distributor. Cheers for listening. Happy glazing.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfeld Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of thousands of objects made by over 800 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfeldcollection.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 454 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Adero Willard. After many years as a studio potter, she's recently moved towards large-scale sculptural vessels that incorporate dense overlapping patterns. In our interview, we talk about the influence of female leadership in her life, as well as how objects can hold power and meaning. She's the curator of the exhibition Clay Holds Water, Water Holds Memory, which will feature 18 Black women or non-binary artists at this year's NCECA conference. That's going to be taking place at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati and is one of the don't miss shows of this year's conference. If you'd like more information, you can go to aderowillard.com or clay-water-memory.com. Along the lines of NCECA, I wanted to mention that we're going to be having the first ever podcast room at this year's conference. There will be 6-hour-long live tapings of popular ceramic podcasts, and I'm grateful that I'll be able to do a taping of this show on Friday at 2:30 in room 212. That's going to be focusing on taking an environmental approach to making and features Marianne Chénard, Julia Galloway, and Ché Ochtli. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast room, you can go to the NCECA website where you'll find the program guide. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Can you talk about how you have learned how to build up layers on the surface of an object, but also what that means for the way you see the object? Because one of the things you do that I found fascinating is sometimes you camouflage form and sometimes you accentuate form, but on the same form. So can you talk about your understanding of that?
I've always been interested in the surface of ceramics. I think one of the reasons why I fell in love with clay was its responsiveness to touch, and that when you touch it or mark it or carve it, it responds back with a mark of that. And it reminded me a lot of skin. And as a young person, I had a lot of I don't know, teenager angst around myself or my identity, my body. And I found that the receptivity of clay was really healing for me. And so in that response to that touch and to this sort of connection to skin, that was sort of my initial falling in love with clay. This, like, it can hear me, it sees me, it understands like something about me, and this back and forth. And so my early work was a lot of carving, and texturing. And I was looking at African scarification and African carving, but specifically body modification, because that's something that as a young teenager, like something that we do, something we think about. And that just kept moving along as I kept working in clay, and it started to evolve onto the surface of the form a little bit more through glazes. And I was doing a lot of glaze decoration using wax resists and glazing. And it wasn't until I went to graduate school that I really realized that in graduate school, there's this thing where you have to find the essential sort of the center place of your work, the place where like the nugget, the central nervous system of your work. If you're lucky, you can get there. And I realized at a certain point in my second year that it was the surface. It was really the surface of the decoration, the pattern, the color. It was that I wanted to pull out of all the work I had brought to grad school and really focus on that. And so I, in my graduate work, was all on tile and slabs, but I made a whole wall of tile, and then I made all of these objects out of the sort of flat scraps of clay, and so from there, I realized I could move back and forth between form. That the surface was sort of the director of the form, but that they were really closely related. So the surface could direct how the form is made, or the form could sort of speak to how it wanted to be clothed. And so I have this like really great resource, I feel like, in my toolbox that I've been I keep building this. I still see myself always as someone who's learning and finding out more and discovering more ways to do this, but how to have this conversation have a conversation with my ideas. So my work can be functional, it can be figurative, and abstractly figurative. My work is never like really closely direct, but directly representational. But because of that language of pattern and that language of pattern and how it can speak to the body or to the skin of a pot, or I really am able to sort of play with that. It's like a play that I have with the form. It's like a back and forth. And so, yeah, sometimes I am thinking about camouflaging, and that is something that is sort of an essential, maybe essentially something that I am feeling in the moment wherever I am. Maybe it's like I really need a ton of color, because it's like right now everything's brown and white, and I just need to eat. I need to see. I need to like celebrate color. Maybe it's about the body or clothing. So I think that's where I start everything. So I can elaborate so much more, but let's start there.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with skin. There was a series you made called the Entangle, I think it's Entangle series. And that was the series that I saw that had the most direct figural elements. Like there were vessels, but they had the sense of hips or shoulders, or, a curve pushing this way, a curve pushing that way. And once I saw that, it made me think about the patterns you use really differently, because I started to think about it as that the vessel was enlivened, like that the vessel was a being, which I think comes even more in some of the newer work, which we'll talk about. But can you just talk about that body of work and wanting something to be more directly figural?
When I started working in coil, I was drawn to coil for one, by looking more and more at West African pots, but actually I was also looking at sort of the global approach to building pots through coil. So I was looking at ongi pots, and I was looking at some different pots from all over the world, and how I was really drawn to how those pots, those specific historic pots, at least to me, really spoke to that culture's identity. like the fermentation pots, the ongi pots, like those are pots. Whenever like a student of mine wants to make those, I'm like, you have to do the research. You have to like understand where this pot comes from and where it belongs, like where it's been, where it came from, what its language is, and how it really is like so much a Korean pot. And you can, like, a student can make one, but you have to have that conversation, that long conversation with that pot. So I was thinking about that and how much coil did that, and how I was trying to make those connections back to some of my really distant ancestries. And along with my Native American ancestries all come back to coil. So I started making coil pots from like left the wheel for a while. And it also gave me the opportunity to work a lot larger. I started making these pots I called embodiments, garments of clay. That was the first series. And they were sort of my pots, larger, coil built. And they were really beautiful. And I look back at them, I'm like, I am proud of them, but they are my pots, larger, with the same surface on them. And it was just that what I had to do to make that leap, and then so the entanglement pieces was an actual like understanding of this scale of the body. So they're torso size, that's a term we use a lot in ceramics, torso size, or I like to think of a pot as like the size of like the actual heart or liver, or like the size of something internal. But this torso size vessel could speak to the body a little bit more clearly. So yeah, when I was building those, I was really thinking about the body and the female form, but this exaggerated idea of the female form. And when I look back at them now, I spent a lot of time in my childhood, and my mother was part of a spiritual path called Siddha Yoga. So I spent a lot of time in the Indian sort of spiritual path, I guess. And I even went to India. So that was a big influence, I think, in my work. And when I look at a couple of those forms, I see that exaggerated form of the body. And I don't know if that wasn't consciously done, but I like there's a lot of like things that percolate in my mind, and there's a lot of like things that come through memory. But yeah, those forms and like connecting directly to the body, connecting to the female body, connecting to making a little bit more of a direct connection, but also keeping it really abstract. So not like, I really want my work to read abstractly. This idea of female energy, power, an object. I'm really interested in power objects from different cultures, and what that does. And I'm not really clear at this moment what that means for our time and our place right now. And that's a really beautiful challenge that I say challenge, and I say beautiful challenge because it's not problematic. It's not a problem for me, but it's a challenge that I'm facing, and I'm really interested in facing, how to connect those ancestral objects to like contemporary moments, and how to do that in a respectful way, in a really truly respectful way and a current way.
This idea of objects holding power is something that in the religious context we accept. Like if you go into a church or if you go into a mosque, there are objects around that we just kind of all understand, like, okay, that object is important. But then when an artist makes that object, and not in the religious context, it's interesting. There's like almost more doubt there, even though we're all humans. We're all embodying or imbuing all of the objects we make with power. For some reason, the religion gives it more like credence. And I've always wondered about that, because I've studied objects that have kind of gone in and out of religion as they've been handed down. So, for instance, my family Bible, I'm not religious, but my family Bible is the record of our family. Like, I have in my great-great-grandmother's handwriting the names of all the children she had and the dates, because that's what you did in the beginning of the family Bible. So this object really does hold my family history. So I guess I'm thinking I just want to have an exploratory conversation about where in your life do you see objects that have power like that, or that have that sense of presence?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that's a really great question for all of us to ask ourselves and answer, because of the place we are in with objects today, how little we understand the objects we live with, how quickly and kind of frivolously we buy them and discard them, and sort of this, I don't know if it's anti-meaning or anti-spirituality that people feel like afraid of, um including myself at times in my life. Oh, I'm just making this work because, like, not sort of being afraid to assign any kind of spirituality. It could be seen as a goofy, people are, I think, yeah, it can be seen as unacademic,
Unserious.
and serious. And so I think that's been something I've been revisiting a lot recently. The objects in my life, I would say that a huge amount have been fabric. What my memories are of my childhood and moving through my life, I feel this this really deep connection to fabric, just fabric. And then what that, the piles of fabric, I think I've written about that, the piles of fabric on my grandmother's sewing table, and the piles of fabric on this woman Priscilla, who used to take care of me a lot as a younger person, would have these piles of fabric that she was always like wrestling, like she was always sort of like in the middle of some kind of like trying to figure out what she was going to do, how she was going to sew. It was just a big part of her life, and she was a big part of my life. And so I connect some of this meaning to this fabric, but to these women, and assign this like sort of idea, this, it's not an idea, but it's sign like an importance of this matriarchy. And I use that word, I like to use that word because it has a spiritual ring to it. It has a powerful ring to it. It has a power for me to think about the women in my life and what they've tried to teach me. I had like a kind of a tumultuous, traumatic childhood, and I'm always trying to sort of grab onto the things that gave me strength and gave me perseverance. And those moments when those women imparted that knowledge to me, or imparted moments of their own like creativity, I think. And actually, like, creativity was a huge thing that I kind of pulled on from these women, of their strength in a time like my grandmother struggled a lot with her position as a woman in the 50s. Like, she did not want to be a stay-at-home mother who had to take care of the home, but that's what she did, because that's what she was asked to do and told to do. But she then had this huge like connection to her creativity in the home and the gardens and the fabrics and all of the ways she navigated the house. And like the same thing with a lot of women in my life, how they've taken the things, maybe some of the things that have made them feel oppressed or have actually oppressed them, but have sort of turned and found these connections to their internal creativity. And I see that as being really powerful, and something that I really move along and move around in my own work.
Can you talk more about when in your life you've had leadership from women that you could that in the moment you understood was special? Because the most recent body of work does look back to female leaders in the past. But when in your life could you identify, like, okay, this is good, like they are protecting me, or they're just leading me?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I connect the Mino and the Gigwa. They're words that hold in place. They're the representation of these women in my life that have imparted guidance and power and have to me. And so one in particular is my Aunt Rosalie, who died a while, like too young. She died in her maybe late 50s, early 60s of hospital complications. And so we weren't ready for her to go. She wasn't ready to go. She had held a huge place in our family in reconnecting all of us. So her own history was that my grandmother, their mother, my father and her mother died at the age of 22 in a fire. And then they were raised by this horrible, I call him the horrible grandfather. He was a monster. Sorry, family, if you're out there listening to this, but you all know. And he took them away from that community of family and raised them in DC and New York, and never spoke of that family. And so my father and my aunt both grew up in really problematic, really traumatically problematic and abusive lives. My Aunt Rosalie was taken away and put in foster care, and that was horrible. Anyway, so we won't go down that path, but their lives were very hard. But my aunt became this really powerful woman, in her stature, in her being. She really pulled a lot of her stuff together and was able to sort of reclaim her space on this planet, in herself. And then she did it with our family. She brought us all together. My father's family. She brought my father back into the family, and then all of his kids. Like I have a brother and two sisters, and we all didn't know each other. And there were actually, my brother's has children, so she brought us all together and reconnected us. And so she was this matriarchal glue. And she not only brought us together, but taught us how to respect and love each other and respect that space, and was able to even teach my dad how to occupy that space. And they found their native family. Like they had been estranged from that side of their family their entire life till my aunt was 50. They found that family. So it was much later in life that they reconnected with their native side of their family. And so so that's why she was important. And when I think of her, was this really colorful. She wore like colorful clothes, and always imparted this respect for being a woman, for respect for oneself for being a woman, respect for that empowerment of being a woman. And that wasn't something that I had a lot of in my life. It was and something that I find really important to who I am today. And it continues, even though hasn't been here on the planet, she continues to teach me those things. And I continue to want to teach those things and be that person for my students and the women in my life. And, not just, I think for men and women, that is an important, thing to understand. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about your family history. Yeah, I think it sets up the newer body of work and your interest in female leadership. So can you first talk about the Mino and the Gigwa? Is that how do you say it? Yeah, can you talk about who they were and what the roles within their groups were? Because that's the name of the new series of work.
You probably know more. You might know more about this histories than I do. Part of a lot of my work, and so my work kind of runs multiple journeys or multiple researches, multiple paths, I think. There's this love just purely of color. Like if you know me, you know that I sometimes say that I want to put a color inside my eyeball, like, or I want to eat like I think I've been told I might have synesthesia. I wouldn't doubt it. I feel like I heal from color. I have to, like, it's this internal real like connection to color that I have never really fully I just follow that instinct of this love of color. So that's a really big part of my work. It's just that connection to color, and then there's the connection to pattern, and then there's the connection to clay. Then there's this connection, this sort of search which has been happening in my family for hundreds of years, this search for identity, a place a sense of roots. My father, on my father's side, I'm African American, and just recently in the last 10 or 15 years, understood our connection to Ché R Cherokee ancestry. And so this idea of like separation, not of extraction from meaning, has, it's even more complicated, but I don't have, that's been an essential part of my work, is what is my identity? What does that mean? Being I grew up kind of with a lot of different labels. Mulatto has been used, multiracial, biracial, Black, whatever. So many different things I have sort of navigated around, and that's just true of Black people and the history of this country, that these ideas of these titles and identities being labeled onto people has been a long run thing, and I think has caused a lot of for a lot of folks in this country a sense of imbalance and a search for roots. My dad went back to Africa in the 70s and spent 2 years there trying to find, like connecting to his roots and his African American roots. But I don't know if he ever really found, it's like this ongoing thing. And so I then also had my own kind of my own sense of that. What does it mean? What does multiracial mean? What does biracial mean? It's like it was a new concept in the 70s in some ways, because before that people weren't really legally, it wasn't widely accepted that Black and white people married and had children. It was accepted in pockets of the country. And so a child of a biracial couple was complicated. Oftentimes that child was considered Black in our history. Jim Crow laws and all, assign that as what a child was, with one drop of Black blood. And so the term multiracial and biracial, when I was born in 72, so it was I think a really new term, and one that no one was necessarily that comfortable with. I'm not sure my mother, my family was that comfortable with it, with me. I don't know. I still am trying to figure that out. But so I've done a lot of thinking about the language around terminology and where we like the words around these terms we apply to ourselves. So a lot of my own, I now and have for many years identify as a Black woman. But then I'll do I'll say a Black woman of mixed race identity or multi-race identity, a woman of, I'll like change and sort of stretch it out depending on where I am in that moment, with that whole thing. But so around the language of the Mino and Guigua, I was thinking about how we understand who we are based on these sort of really, for me, very distant historic ancestries, ones that I don't necessarily like. Do I have access to them? Am I allowed? I hear that from my students of color too, students who feel really distanced from their ancestry. Am I allowed to do this? Is it appropriation? How do we And so I wanted to sort of claim that space for a minute and claim it really specifically around women and female empowerment, and take it on from just the word, literally this word Mino, meaning Black female warrior, like the most amazing warriors of our time, right? Excuse me. And then the Cherokee leader, these female Cherokee leaders who are the most powerful female leaders of Cherokee tribes. And then putting I call the series Mino, I call those pieces specific, that one piece, actually, there's only one or two, Mino, Guigua, Prunk, it's Prunck. And the Prunk is the word that throws all of that into contemporary mix of mess of a moment of now. Like Prunk isn't really a word. I looked it up. I tried to find a word that sort of sounded like funk or had some associations with different things, but had maybe no association. And that's sort of how I feel I am. I am Mino, I am Guigua, and I am Prunk. It's all those things tied together. And how do I claim that space now, today? And then, in thinking about a connection to Afrofuturism, how do we take that past, come to the present, and then think about this powerful future that we all can occupy in this. So it's somewhat about potential. So with these warrior women, I'm pulling potential and trying to figure out what that means for the future. I don't know. It's where I am right now. It's really early work. And so the listeners, I'm just I'm still trying to figure a lot of this out.
Well, I appreciate you talking about it. And what you said about claiming space is interesting, because this body of work, scale-wise and sensation-wise, is more. It's claiming more space. And some of that is that let's say on your older functional pots, there's overlapping patterns. But if the pot is the size of your hand roughly, you can see in your peripheral other things. But these objects are large. When you're looking at them, that is what you're seeing. It fills up, sensation-wise, it fills up your brain with all of this information. And that idea of claiming space, I think, it's personified in the work. So can you talk about how these things are actually made? Because to say they're layers on layers doesn't fully describe what it is. So can you talk about just one of the pieces?
so I like working in a lot of different ways. I realized in the last few years, like the wheel is just one of the tools that I can use. I can coil, I can throw, I can slab, I can, it's like, what is the actual thing that I'm making at the time? And then what's the right approach to making that? So now, like, everything's open. I might be printing clay objects one day. I don't know, not anytime soon, but I realized that I wanted the pattern to be, I wanted to really work with the pattern inside the form, like inside like inside the skin of the actual pot, like, so it meshed. And so I started making slabs where the printing, like the decoration of the slab, started on the slab. So using paper, I'm using using all paper, very little wax right now, to lay out all those patterns on the slabs and then building with them. And so a lot of the forms, like some of the like open vessel forms, have decoration on the inside. And in fact, that really large piece I am calling Mino Guigua is got decoration on the inside. And if you could look into it, you can see there's stuff going on the inside of that, like, top section. But I wanted it to, so I start with that as a form, and then I start layering on top of that with more decoration, using more paper stencils, drawing on with slips, refiring them and painting more on, and as much as I can. Like, I actually don't think any of those pieces are done. I had to put a couple of them in shows. They could keep going I could keep going, and I could keep putting them in and out of the kiln and adding to them. And so I started to think about them with this way of applying more and more surface. So that initial surface might have some stripes on it and some shapes sort of placed on them with paper stencils, and then built. But then on top of, like, eventually you almost start to lose all of that. You start to almost see very little of that initial pattern, but it's there. It's a part of that skin underneath all of that. And that's important to me too. But then it's growing. And I started to understand these pieces as growing. They're alive. And actually I've been starting to write about them as in flight. Like, I'm calling those bowls, those like kind of large sort of bowl forms, prunk lift, or lift prunk, because they actually, there's all of these shapes on the top that I'm adding after they've been fired, and then refiring them and adding more and refiring them. And what I'm looking for is the right amount of these to have this piece actually lift off the table. And the Mino Guigua piece, I want her to be able to lift her weight, lift the gravity of the body, the weight, that tremendous amount of weight, off the table and fly. And I can start to see that. I'm starting to be able to see that. And it's one of the most, I feel like in my work, the most sort of amazing thing to have this real, like, conversation going on between the work and me. Like, this, it's a real conversation. Like, the piece is talking to me about what it wants to do, along with this conversation of, like, potential and lifting like a heavy weight, lifting this weight of all of the things I feel like I carry around every day, all of the, like, baggage, I guess, of the things I'm trying to make sense of.
Yeah, and it feels like this series, and hearing you talk about this series, that there is a personification of you that is happening more than, say, in the pots. And I'm interested in that, and how you've been able to make that leap from function, which has very specific parameters around the other person that gets the pot, to where this work feels more about you. Like, it still stays in the realm of you. So can you talk about that, moving up to a more sculptural vessel?
It is very much about me, but it is a real, it is also a part of a larger conversation that I think is happening. I think it was your podcast that you had a conversation with Dante Hayes. That was really great. I really love that. I love all of your conversations, but there's a few that I'm just like, wow, that I learned a lot from that. And this idea of something that is really personal, but then kind of connects to history, and then this idea of like a potential future. I also am obsessed with Wengechi Mutu, and also really looking at a lot of Black women ceramic artists right now, and which is what, I hope we get to the show Clay Holds Water, Water Holds Memory, but that whole conversation about this, like, what is in the air right now? There's a lot going on right now in the air around this past history, like recognizing our past, like, Osa Atoe's work around the David McDonald work, and how we are, Sana Musa Sana, like the need for us to recognize Sana and Sid Carpenter and Lydia Thompson and all, these women that I've been looking at since I was an undergrad, like this, like momentum of importance of this importance of knowing these amazing artists right now, I think has a lot to do also with that, with the work, which is why the title is important, because I could have titled it something a lot more personal. The title is fairly impersonal in some ways, because I am not Mino, I'm not really a direct lineage to the Mino directly. I have African American ancestry, so hundreds of years ago. Maybe there's some 400 years ago or 500, I don't know. And the Guiguas, I also don't have, I have this really distant connection to my Cherokee ancestry, at least at this point in my life. And but I have a connection to this lineage of Black women makers, and what we're trying, like what's happening right now, and what I can say, what I want to say about both a personal exploration and that connection to a history. So, when I look at my work and I look, I wonder about how much I need to make that more clear. But I think sometimes it just needs to be part of the conversation. I feel like it's an important part of the conversation. This like maybe idea of reclaiming identity, finding identity, demanding space within one's, not demanding space, but sort of claiming space of part of being a part of the conversation in the canon. As a educator, it's like crazy how little is there, and when it is there, it's problematic. And so, yeah, I guess it's a lot. I just said a lot of different things. I don't know if that made any sense. But.
Well, you actually provided a great segue to talk about the exhibition that's going to be happening at NCECA. And one of the ways that we can expand the canon is through exhibitions, because when you put the work in front of people's face, they have to reckon with it. And I think that's an important part of this show. There's also a panel you're going to be at NCECA that I think is called "We've Been Here This Whole Time." So it's it's a claiming of space at NCECA. But I want you to talk about Clay Holds Water, Water Holds Memory, and the process of putting that show together and what it means to you.
Yeah, I got a lot bigger. Well, yeah, I got a lot bigger than I thought, but that's a real thing in my life, that I think about something and I don't realize how big I actually am when I'm actually taking on. So I was like, I want to do a show of Black women ceramics, at NCECA. And then I started to look at all the Black women in ceramics. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of Black women in ceramics. And so I started sending out the invitations, and I was so honored and blown away by the women who agreed to be a part of this show. And then I got some women who didn't, and some people, because it's a show of women and non-binary artists. So I want to be respectful, but I got some people who couldn't do the show because for whatever reason they were busy, or so there were a number of people who couldn't do the show. And then there's all of these women and non-binary artists who I couldn't ask, after 19 or 20 artists, it's like, oh, that's a lot. I'm only one person. I've never curated a big exhibition at NCECA before. It's like a first time. So it's like, I gotta limit this to 19 or 20 artists. So I do want to really recognize all of the people I have not been able to include in this show. And I hope that we continue to do these exhibitions so we include people that aren't in this show, because there are a lot. Yeah, I really wanted this show to happen and got this. So NCECA accepted it. We got a space. And then Pots on Wheels, which is an organization I'm part of, I'm a co-founder of. So I co-founded that with 5 or 6, I think it was 6, it may have been up to 8 potters at the time when we first started, who started Pots on Wheels. And been a part of this nonprofit organization since 2014. And Hannah Nieswanger, who is, I think our kind of has been our leadership in Pots on Wheels for a long time, was like, let's see if POW can, see how we can have POW help with this show. So Hannah has been a sort of essential part of some of this organization. And one of those things was kind of asking NCECA for more help with the show. And so we've been in conversation with NCECA, who's been extremely supportive, but they were able to move our show to the Contemporary Arts Center. So the show really is, well, my hopes was that it would be an expression of the work, of the beautiful work that all of these artists have. Some have been doing for 40 or 50 years, some who are just entering into the field. But this show that I felt like needed to happen in NCECA, like an all Black, female, and non-binary show at NCECA. Like, I don't know, and stated that way, titled that way. And that's a conversation I've been having actually with folks in Cabo Clay Collective. Like, what is the need? What do people want? And one of those, there's many conversations happening around this, but one of them was like, no, if you're going to do a show, make sure the title is clear. Make sure it's clear. Because I thought about maybe having this show, but having a title that wasn't as like Black, female, ceramic artists, Black, female, non-binary artists. But in the conversation, it sounded like folks were really wanting it to be really specific and clear and upfront. This is what this is. And so in that, really like wanting to make sure the show was respected, not tokenized. Like, it's a really complicated show at NCECA, because NCECA is a predominantly white institution. So anytime you start bringing in like a show of Black people, that potential for it to become a tokenized thing, or it's been a really difficult and challenging and for me personally. And and that's not to say, NCECA has been extremely supportive and has moved, helped us, has gone out of its way to help us. And CAC, Contemporary Arts Center, has gone out of its way to be supportive. And even Pots on Wheels, which I'm the only person of color on that, on Pots on Wheels, but Pots on Wheels has always been sort of demanding, and part of its mission statement is for diversity. So they're always been very supportive of that. But they're still all kind of predominantly white spaces. So navigating that and figuring out how to do this in the most powerful way has been exciting and challenging, daunting. It's been a lot. And the show isn't even up yet, but I'm really excited for this show. And we have, I hope that you all who are listening, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk to the listeners, Ben, but go check it out. And check out our fundraiser, which we will be doing.
Yeah, and we should talk about that. But I have a question about the tone of the show. In the writing about it, I like that you said that this is a celebration. Like, this is not about, because I think in the media and the news, Black pain is prevalent. Like, you see it a lot. But Black celebration, sometimes it's weird that that's the better emotion, or the more pleasant emotion, but it gets marginalized. Like, somehow that's scary, I think. But this is a celebration, and the work is a celebration, and it's a multi-generational show. So I do like that there are people that are relatively new, somewhat fresh out of graduate school or undergrad. And then there's people that have been working for decades that are really icons in the field. And this show is a way to put their work out even more. So can you just mention a few of the folks that are in there?
So, as I mentioned before, Sana Musasama, who is, like, I have to say, a hugely important person to me and to many of us all in the field of ceramics. I have to highlight her in terms of someone who I am so grateful and honored to have in the show, as well as Sid Carpenter and Lydia Thompson. Those are artists that and many of us have been looking at for 20 or 30 years. When I was an undergrad at Alfred, I was looking at those artists. But then there is, there as well is Osa Atoe and Yinka Orafadia. I'm sorry, Yinka, if I'm saying your last name wrong. I should have. Anyway, who are both community activists, community leaders in the field, and are doing a tremendous amount of work to speak to the artists that haven't really we don't recognize as much as we should, like Winnie Owens. Yinka's doing some work towards bringing forward Winnie Owens' legacy more clearly, and Osa has done that with Sana Musasama and with David McDonald. I'm sure there'll be more. And then there's you just had Joey Quinones, who is I have two artists who are sculptors, Joey Quinones and Angela Drakeford. Both sculptors who work in mixed media, but Clay is in their work, who are both really interesting artists in the field. So I wanted to have that mixed media. I think, I will talk about some of the young people coming in. Chelsea McMaster and Victoria Walton are both graduate students at Alfred, and their work is both really powerful, coming in as young people to both challenge the system or speak to what's missing in the canon. Chelsea specifically around her Antiguan history of pots, her work. I hope that you all keep an eye on that, because that's going to be coming up. She just got a fellowship to do that work. So anyway, there's like a lot of different, there's not just so it's this, the people I picked in this show, and I would have had more if I could have, but are all very, it's a very diverse show. It's an extremely diverse show of not just the objects being made, but where people are from, their ancestry, the way, their way they make, their choice in how they navigate the ceramics field, whether they are in academia or not in academia, that's, you know, purposeful. A lot of these artists in the show have made very purposeful choices in where they are. And I thought, like, in terms of also I think you were talking about this in Joey's interview, but this idea of how Black identity can be flattened. And I wanted this show to really like three-dimensionalize the hell out of it. You cannot pinpoint one, you can't really make any one really specific connection between any of these like artists, and they're all Black, and but of so much complexity and intricacy within the entire show. I'm really proud of this show, of the being given the chance. I've been given the chance to do this show by these artists. They chose to accept that, me as the curator and organizer, and that's huge. That's a huge honor to hold that space, and I feel a lot of weight in this moment in time. But I hope that it just continues on and grows, and other people take on some of this as well, and it continues to move forward.
So let's end by plugging the fundraiser that you guys are doing for Pots on Wheels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We are in the process at this moment of having a Kickstarter for this show. Clay holds water, water holds memory. Through Pots on Wheels. Pots on Wheels is going to be the fiscal sponsor of this fundraiser, and we're raising money to do outreach programming during NCECA. So we'll have 2 workshops that will happen that will be connected to the show. So we'll bring in high school age kids to come and look at the show, and we'll talk with the kids about the show, but also do clay programming with one or 2 of the artists. So some of the fundraisers for that, and then some of the fundraisers for the show, cost of the show, I really wanted to support the artists as much as possible. So a small percentage of the funds is going towards helping the artists ship the work, because I know, as we all know as artists, that can be a huge kind of weight to try to do a show. But so the fundraiser is really around supporting the exhibition, but supporting the larger sort of educational core of what this show is as well. So by supporting the show, you're kind of supporting sort of the ongoing conversation around Black exhibitions, in spaces like this, or Black exhibitions on their own. It's just sort of this, I think, an ongoing conversation. But anyway, the fundraiser will hopefully start on February 7th. I have a feeling you might see it maybe a little later in the week, maybe closer to February 9th or 10th, but we will be posting that, and I hope you will all support the show. There's some amazing potters. It's an exhibition on its own. We have potters and ceramic artists like Paul Briggs and Roberto Lugo, and so many amazing artists. I'm now blanking on all of the amazing artists that have Brooke Cashion. There's a ton of really great artists in the show. So by donating, you often can receive a pot from the show. You can also just donate to the show as well, but you can also receive a beautiful object in return.
Well, I love that Pots on Wheels, that you guys engage local communities. So in Cincinnati, like bringing in these high school students, I think that it really helps all of NCECA, because sometimes my fear with NCECA is like we descend on the city and then we fill up the galleries and we take up the space and we eat at the restaurants. But then afterwards, what did we give the city? Like once we're all gone, what did we give them? So I love that Pots on Wheels, it is a mobile gallery, but it's really almost like a mobile arts center. Like you're engaging people through the programming in a multi-pronged approach, which I really appreciate that. How can people donate?
Yeah, that's a great question. We will be posting all of these links to the fundraiser through our social media. You'll see, we'll ramp back up our not very well. So our social media needs some work, but we'll ramp that back up. That'll be up on our Pots and Wheels, but it'll also be in all of our individual social media. So Hannah Nieswanger, Hayne Bayless, Sam Taylor will all be sort of speaking to that. And we will also have all the artists be promoting this. So you should see all of that, but also our Pots on Wheels website, potsonwheels.org. And then also there's a Clay Holds Water website, which is clay-water-memory.com. We'll have the link as well. And I just do really appreciate that you said that, Ben, because part of this exhibition is to speak to, it's also a tremendously speaks to mentorship that this show can have with young people who might be interested in getting into clay. And by seeing the representation of women, Black women and non-binary artists, can have that like powerful connection to a young person and maybe provide that confidence to move forward. So thank you for saying that. It was really great.
And can you leave your social media just in case people want to get in touch and talk about any of this?
Yeah, it's all Adero Willard. Adero, I think my Instagram is Adero Willard. My Facebook is Adero Willard. And I have a website, aderowillard.com. So that's a really great way to find me. There's not many Adero Willards, so you should be able to find me pretty easily out there.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's been so fun. I really enjoyed it.
I'd like to thank Adero for coming on the show. I really appreciate her spending some time and talking about her new work. Also wanted to thank today's sponsors. That's Amico Brent, the Archie Bray Foundation, and the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor on this show or any of our other shows on the Brickyard Network, we would love to have your support. You can get in touch through the network website, which is brickyardnetwork.org. Also wanted to mention that at this year's NCECA podcast room, which I've talked about in the intros for all of the recent episodes of this show, we're going to be having all kinds of podcast swag. We're going to be doing a giveaway with Amico, giving away $150 worth of Amico products. Then we're also going to have t-shirts, posters, stickers, all kinds of podcast-related things. So I hope you'll come see us in room 212 at NCECA in Cincinnati. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.